What's going on, guys? It's Simo, and today we are going to be ranking every single banned card on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list. Now, obviously, we can only do the cards that are active at the current moment, but we have 101 cards to cover, and we are going to be ranking every single one of them. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a long one, and I hope you guys enjoy. Did I have to do this? Absolutely not, but I thought it would be a ton of fun to do so. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We've got the tiers here over on Tier Maker, S, A, B, C, D, and F. S tier is going to be something that's game warpingly broken, where F tier is going to be something that could probably just come off the ban list entirely, just to give you an idea of the range of the spectrum here. So let's start off with Time Seal. Time Seal stops you from having your draw phase. This is like a D tier card in my opinion. This card was really good back in the day, but now by today's standards, setting a card to stop your opponent to draw, like, I don't think that's particularly good in the slightest. Maybe there's some decks that can abuse this, but I think this card's fine. Whatever. Confiscation's an interesting one. You get to look at your opponent's hand and take a card from it. I think this is actually a B tier hand destruction card. Some of the other hand destruction cards we're going to be covering, I feel, are a lot stronger. I think this is actually one of the weakest of the bunch, and when we get to those other ones, I will use that for context. Constellar Ptolemaeus. This card is actually kind of crazy, but it's not like game warpingly busted. I kind of feel like this is maybe a B tier. I kind of want to make this an A tier card as well, but you do need to have specific decks in order to play this card. So I'm going to give this a B just because, yes, it does break the ability for you to kind of go into other cards your deck shouldn't be able to if you're playing a rank 4 deck, but it's not like game warpingly strong, if that makes sense. Dimension Fusion, however, is an S tier. This card is just absolutely absurd. Being able to special summon all of your banished monsters to go in for huge OTKs. This card should have like never been printed. This should have never been allowed. If this were legal today, this would just break the game entirely. So S tier card, hands down. Electromight, this one's an interesting one. I'm actually going to give this a B tier. A lot of people feel like Electromight could come off the ban list. I think it could as well, but the thing is, this is still a very strong Yu-Gi-Oh card. This has 3 effects, and they are just all good. This is a Pendulum player's wet dream. Even though it's a banned card, and it should be able to come off, so it should be down here, the card is actually good. Like, Time Seal isn't like a good card, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a B tier. Substitute, oh man, this card gives me PTSD. I'm going to give this an A tier. So Substitute, yes, is game warping because the Frog FTK may be one of the most consistent FTKs of all time. However, I don't know if it's S tier good because you still have to specifically playing a Frog deck for it to be powerful. So I'm going to give it an A tier just because of that reason alone. Mirage of Nightmare, man, this card's really good. This card's actually really insane. This card allows you to just draw like 4 cards, and there's more ways than ever to be able to enable this card. I want to give it an A tier because you do need another card along with it in order to keep the advantage that Mirage provides. It's a very, very dangerous card, but I think it's an A tier just because it's not always going to be good. There's going to be times where it's a little bit iffy, so I'm going to put that here. Vanity's Emptiness, S tier. This card is just absurd. I don't know how this card was legal for as long as it was, just denying opponents the ability to actually have a core mechanic of the game, especially after you've already set up completely and then you just flip Emptiness and it's game over at that point because the game is so special summon reliant. This card is absolutely game warping and deserves to be an S tier. Lavable Chain, being able to Foolish Burial any card in your deck is pretty decent, I would say, but you do need to be playing level 4s specifically because you have to make a rank 4 in order to do that. The other effect to stack a card on top is kind of whatever. I'm actually going to give this a C tier. I feel like this card is very powerful, but again, you have to be specifically in a rank 4 deck for it to be good. So great card, but is limited in that capacity. Next up is Last Turn. Oh my god. This card is just a complete mess. If you haven't watched the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where MBT and I try to resolve this, it's an absolute nightmare. So this is an interesting one. This is a game warping card because of how stupid it is, but it's not a good game warping card, if that makes sense. I feel like I want to put this card somewhere around here, but I don't know exactly where. I almost want to put this in D tier just because it's just so stupid. It's such a the concept of it is cool, right? Having only one last turn, one battle where your monsters fight to the death and whoever wins is the winner of the duel, right? But it's so dumb. Like the way it actually works, there's like 500 restrictions on it, and there's ways to like bypass it, and it's just a ruling's nightmare. I think I'm gonna put this in D tier, actually. Like, I love the design of this card, but this card's just so stupid. Yatagarasu. Man, Yata's weird. Yata, I feel like if we were putting this in the context of like 2003, 2004, then Yata should be an S tier, right? Yata's actually the card that has been on the ban list longer than any other card in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, which is actually a pretty cool little factoid in case you never knew that. But in today's actual Yu-Gi-Oh format, how good is Yatagarasu, right? It eats your normal summon, it's 200 attack. It does stop your opponent's draw phase, like it's still a good card, but is it that good by today's standards? And that's really the question. I want to put this as an S tier. I really, really do. I think I'm going to bump it down to A because the legacy this card has, no pun intended, is absolutely phenomenal, but I think by today's standards, it's not nearly as game warping as it was before. Brilliant Fusion. Brilliant Fusion is an incredible card. This card enabled so many different combinations and allowed decks to play in ways that they were never really able to do before, giving you additional normal summons with cards such as Seraphonite. But is it like broken? I'm not exactly sure. I'm gonna give this a C tier. This is like a very like powerful card, but again, only certain decks can really take advantage of it. But the more and more this card was around, people found ways to make it work. Nightmare Goblin is kind of in that same capacity, right? It's a really neat card because it allows you to have an extra normal summon and was very, very powerful for that reason. And a lot of decks could take advantage of it. The thing is though, this is in the extra deck and it's a lot easier to summon Goblin compared to like playing Brilliant Fusion because you can summon Goblin at any time where you have to hard draw the Brilliant Fusion. So I think I'm going to give it a B just because it's a little bit easier to Goblin than it is to have something such as Brilliant Fusion. Next up though, we have Mirage Stalio. This is like an F tier in terms of like banned cards. This is one of the cards that's on the list that could come off. Mirage Stalio is a great card, don't get me wrong, but when you're looking at it in the context of everything we currently have on the list and everything else we have to come down here, this card is laughable that this is on the ban list. Konami, take this card off. This card does not need to be here. Dandelion though, Dandelion's actually crazy. Dandelion is really good. A mandatory effect, I believe, to be able to summon tokens, especially in Link format. You can revive it. It's not once per turn. This is a very, very dangerous card, actually. I think I might actually give this an A tier. Dandelion is insane. Masterpiece is next, and God, do I hate this card. A lot of people love it. I don't know why. This card is just absolutely horrific. I'm going to give this an A tier. The fact that it's impervious to 2 of the 3 main card types in the game when you tribute summon it, it can pop stuff at quick effect speed, and its attack power is gigantic. Yeah, this card is like not okay. Masterpiece, it's game warping, but again, you have to be playing Draco specifically, so I'm going to knock it down a few points for that, and I'm going to put it in A. MX Saber Invoker. This is a very decent card. I think I'm going to put this in, this is either going to go in B or C tier, I think. Being able to tutor a monster from the deck is incredibly strong, especially with how diverse the pool is of cards that Invoker can get. But again, only specific decks can actually take advantage of the Invoker. So for that reason, I am going to put it in C tier, kind of like Lavable Chain. Delinquent Duo, this is S tier in my eyes. The fact that this card is a +1 for you, it rips cards out of your opponent's hand, it's not once per turn, it's recyclable. Compared to Confiscation, Delinquent Duo is far and away better. Yeah, sure, you don't get the hand knowledge like Confiscation, but you're ripping more cards out of your opponent's hand. Like, this card is absolutely dumb. And by today's standards, yes, there's a lot of cards that trigger in the graveyard, so maybe it's not nearly as good as it would be back in the day, but this card is just disgusting. It is so good. And you know what? Maybe I'll bump it down to A, actually. I think A might be a little bit better. Next up, Topalogic Gumbalar Dragon. This is a good B tier, I feel. So Gumbalar is absolutely busted because it rips your opponent's entire hand apart before you even get the chance to play, but you need to be playing a deck that can actually extra link and facilitate it. And so there are some hoops you do have to jump through for that to happen. I feel like for that reason, it should be a B tier because it's a lot more work to make something like this. It's not as easy as just like, oh, some activate Dimension Fusion, win the game sort of thing. So you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get to this point. Samsara Lotus, F tier. This is one of those cards that is just on here solely because it enables an FTK, not because the card is actually good. Same thing for Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis, exact same reason actually. So any cards that are like this are going to be F tier because they're just boring and they're not good. They just enable a stupid combo because of the way the game has aged. Zen Matey, this is such a weird one. Like, I feel like this is like a D tier card because they're scared to unban this for us TCG players because Wind Up Hunter is still legal, but ban the Hunter so people can't wind up hand loop. And it's also not 2012 anymore. Like, let's be real. Are we really going to wind up hand loop in 2021? I don't think so. I think this card could have come off the list a long time ago, but it's definitely like a decent card, right? So I think I'm going to just put it up here just because it's like really, really decent. Next up, we we have Glow Up Bulb. This is a good card. This is a very, very good card. But again, it depends on the deck, I feel. And so I feel like this is, it's not as good as Dandelion. I feel like Dandelion is way better just because it can produce so many more tokens and the like. This is like a C tier banned card, I feel. Maybe B tier, but I think Glow Up Bulb's in the context of all these cards, I think Bulb isn't that bad compared to the rest of them. Next up, though, is Cold Wave. Now, Cold Wave is a very devastating card. It makes it so that you can't activate any back row. It basically just seals up games all by itself. I want to give this a C tier, just C for Cold Wave, kind of. This is actually generically good, though, because almost any deck can play this. A lot of combo decks would take it. I'm going to give this a B tier, actually. I think Cold Wave is a B tier card. Wrong-Miniad. This is another no fun zone sort of card that makes it so that your opponent cannot play the game. This is like similar in line to that of like Masterpiece, but again, similar to Gumbalar, you also need to put in a lot of work for this card to be very annoying. I'll give it a B tier just because we gave Gumbalar a B tier as well. Trap Dust Shoot is the next in the hand destruction cards, although this one is a trap. I'm gonna give this a C tier. I feel like Trap Dust Shoot is the weakest out of all of these types of cards. It's similar in line to Confiscation, but your opponent needs to have more than 4 cards in hand, or excuse me, 4 or more cards in hand. And it also is a trap, so you have to wait till your opponent's turn to actually use it. You don't get the information immediately. And while this card was unlimited for a good period of time while the others were banned, I think that's the only reason why it was played so much is because you didn't really have an option. But compared to like Duo and compared to Confiscation, this one is nowhere near as good, but it's still pretty decent, so we'll give it a C. Zodiac Broadball. I'm gonna give this a, this is actually a tough one. I think I'm gonna give Broadball a C tier. Broadball is able to search so many different types of cards in the game because it's not limited to a specific archetype. And this card has enabled a lot of degenerate shenanigans, but again, it is still a part of a specific archetype, even though 2 level 4s can make it. But I don't feel like this is on the power level of something like a Wrong-Miniad or a Gumbalar or an Electromight. You know what I mean? It feels like a C sort of card in the context of everything else. Link Cross. This card is disgusting, actually. I'm gonna give this a B tier. So this is just one crazy combo enabler in the new era of Yu-Gi-Oh! People are so happy to have this ban. This was just free Link fodder. It was absolutely stupid. Free synchro material on top of it. Like, Link Cross just did it all, and I am so happy that this card is gone. Link Cross is not a fun card. Speaking of not fun cards, True King of all Calamities. This is actually one of the newest cards on the ban list, as a matter of fact. And I think, oh man, talking about no fun zone, I'm gonna give this a B tier as well. This is kind of in line with the Gumbalars and the Wrong-Miniads. Looks like we're putting the no fun zone cards up here. It's a card, again, that's very specific because it's a rank 9, so not a lot of decks can actually play it, although there were a lot of people that could cheat it out in a myriad of different ways. But Calamities is a very devastating card, so I'm gonna give it a B tier. Steam the Cloak is sort of like Glow Up Bulb for me. A lot of the reason you're gonna see these tuner monsters on here is because of Crystron Halki Fibrax being able to abuse them in a lot of ways, and Steam is a very good card, but again, it just feels like another Glow Up Bulb, so I'll give it a C tier. Ancient Fairy Dragon. Damn, this card is really good, actually. It's able to do some crazy shenanigans with field spells. This is sort of a relic of the game just being accelerated to a pace where Ancient Fairy Dragon was just a little bit too strong for the game the way it was designed. I feel like this is like a C tier. I mean, it's very good, but I don't know if it's like this level of good. It's a fine card. Block Dragon is an absurd card. There should be no cards in the game that allow you to generate 3 cards just off of it by itself, and then also allow you to do that on your opponent's turn on top of it, which is ultimately why the card got banned. I'm gonna give this a C tier. It's very specific to only one type in the game, but just the amount of advantage that this card can generate is absurd. Blackwing Gofu the Vague Shadow. Oh man, this card is a 1-card Link 3, and this card can do a lot of shenanigans. I want to put this in C tier because we have some of the other token producing cards in there, but Gofu is like a 1-card Link 3 by itself, where the other ones are 1-card Link 2s. Obviously, with Crystron Halki Fibrax, it can get a lot worse than that. I'm gonna put this in B tier, actually. I think Gofu might be a little bit too good, to be honest. Butterfly Dagger Elma is like an F tier. This card is so boring, and yes, there's like these stupid ways that you can enable this card, but I don't think in 2021 anyone would ever be doing Butterfly Dagger Elma loops. I just don't see it happening, so this card's stupid. F tier. Card of Safe Return. This is an S tier. This card is one of the most poorly designed cards I've ever seen. Obviously, you know, when they designed Card of Safe Return, they didn't know Yu-Gi-Oh! Was going to evolve into the game it has today, but the fact that every time a monster is special summoned from the graveyard, you get to draw a card, and there's no hard once per turn or anything on that, yeah, this card is insane and should have never been made. Cyberjar's funny. Cyberjar is a really, really funny and stupid card. I'm gonna put it in D tier. This card could probably come back and would do nothing for the game because who's gonna play Cyberjar nowadays? But it is a fun card. It's like a decent card, and it's one of those cards that a lot of people remember from their childhood. I like this better than something like Dagger Elma or like Samsara Lotus. Title is up next, and I see we have the other Dragon Rulers following shortly behind, so I think we'll just go ahead and do all these at once. These are interesting. So in the context of actual modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I think a lot of people feel that these could come back to 1 and they wouldn't be the worst. They're cool because they're splashable in both Dragon decks as well as their respective attributes, but these cards are very good. These cards are very, very good. I think these are all probably a solid C tier level of card. I mean, Tempest is limited right now, but that's the weakest of the 4 if we're going to be completely honest. I think they're a pretty good C tier. Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion, I want to put this in C tier because we have Glow Up Bulb and we have Steam the Cloak there, but I think I'm going to put this in D tier. The only reason this is here is solely because of Crystron Halki Fibrax, and so it's just like a victim of that and not much else. The card's good. It generates a decent amount of advantage, but it's really only on here because of another card. Pot of Greed, S tier. It's a free +1 in any single deck. I mean, you're probably going to see a lot of the draw cards in the S tier if we're going to be completely honest. Yeah, Pot of Greed. It's broken. There's really nothing else to say. The card is crazy. This belongs nowhere else other than S. Speaking of belonging nowhere else other than S, Maxi can also join its brethren up in the S tier as well. This is one of the biggest game warping cards ever. It's really funny because the OCG has 3 of this and the TCG has 0, and we think that is the correct way to go about it. I 100% agree with that, by the way. This card is format warpingly strong. Anytime someone has Maxi and the opponent doesn't, they are at a huge disadvantage, and this card is just nuts. Elder Entity Norden's interesting because Instant Fusion isn't at 3 anymore, and that's what made Norden very powerful, and so with its enabler being limited, only having like 1 single copy of Norden isn't nearly as good, but I think this is an A tier. Norden being able to generate a single rank 4 just by itself and was responsible for so many different FDKs and loops and so many different shenanigans. When this card was legal, every single deck was pretty much playing Norden just because it was that powerful. I definitely think that this is an A tier card. That Grass Looks Greener is a card that should have never been printed. This is an A tier card. There should be no card in the game that allows you to mill a third of your deck and essentially welcome in the advent of 60 card lists being the meta, because if you send 20 cards from your deck to the graveyard, even if it's random, you're probably going to have 4 or 5 of those cards give you some sort of advantage, and even if it's randomized, that is absolutely not okay. I can't believe this card's legal in Japan, but I hope it stays banned for us TCG players. Fairy Tale Snow, God, this card is oppressive. This card is so annoying. Just having this card recur itself over and over and over again. I think it's like a C tier card. Like, it's good. Obviously, it works in tandem with That Grass Looks Greener very well, but if you're not playing a deck that's very heavy on having cards in the graveyard, this card doesn't do a whole lot. I think it's like an okay C tier. Utopic Zexal, speaking of cards I hate a lot of the cards on this list, let's be honest. I'm gonna put this in B tier. I've been putting a lot of the no fun zone cards in B tier, and Zexal is just the next in line here, making it so that your opponent cannot activate cards or effects, period. Why would you even print a card like that? That just doesn't make any sense to me. Even if it is difficult to get out, even if you have to play a specific deck to do it, there's been so many ways where people made this card work, and it was way too much. This card should have been banned a long time ago. Spiral Master Plan, this is like a C tier card, I think. The reason I like Master Plan here is because it generates you a lot of advantage, right? Once it goes to the graveyard, you get 2 cards, and you can continuously resurrect it and get 3 more cards off of that. So just by itself, like that way, it's a +5, but obviously you're using cards to get other cards, so it may be like a +2 or 3 by the end of it all. Very, very strong enabler in the Spiral strategy. It's pretty decent. Summon Sorceress, oh boy, this is a B tier card. Summon Sorceress just allowed you to link climb so easily, and this card was just devastating when it was legal. It just made it so that as long as you could get to Summon Sorceress, you could get to Firewall, you could just do whatever you wanted at that point. The card is really strong. It's generic. Pretty much every single deck could play it. It enabled so many different types of combos. This is a solid B tier card. Starving Venom, this card is kind of stupid. Like, so the reason this card is banned is because it enabled FTKs, because it can copy Lyrilisk Independent Nightingale and then would allow you to burn your opponent to death if you summon 2 copies of this. I'm putting it in D tier because this card was only used for an FTK, but like this card at least is decent just because it's also just a big monster and has a relevant effect, where like the rest of these cards are just like absolutely pointless. This card's decent standalone by itself, so I think D for decent on Starving Venom. Eclipse Wyvern's like a C tier. This card's pretty good, allowing you to just get a lot of cards back. It's not a once per turn, so you can just generate a ton of advantage with it. It was definitely more abused now than it was when it was was first released in the original Chaos Dragon decks, which is ultimately why it got banned, but it's a fine card. Sky Striker, Mobilize, Engage. This was Pot of Greed that was legal at 3 for about a year or so. I'm going to give this an A tier, actually. This was splashable in numerous decks. The fact that it wasn't a once per turn meant you could use it multiple times. You could get it back with Kagari. The cards you could search were generic, so you could either steal your opponent's monsters, negate their effects, pop their spells and traps, pop their monsters. This card was absurd. I don't know how they printed this and it was legal for so long. This card is definitely A tier. Ib the World Chalice Justice Shard. This is like a C tier, I feel like. It does generate a very good amount of advantage, but you have to be playing Synchro 5s for it to be good. I think it kind of falls in line with some of the other cards here that are very strong, but require you to actually have the proper deck and vessel for it to be very potent. Guard Dragon Agripane, and I feel like this almost falls in the same category, but I actually think I'm going to give Agripane a B tier. The reason for this is because this card just breaks the whole concept of needing to summon cards correctly. You could just bring out dragons from your extra deck, and there's like no card in Yu-Gi-Oh! That really allows you to do that, aside from like Waking the Dragon, I guess. But the fact that Agripane could do it so seamlessly as a part of dragon combos, this card was nuts. This card was insane, and so I think this gets bumped up slightly higher than some of these other ones here, just because of the power level that this card possesses. Jet Synchron is like a C tier, I feel. It kind of falls in line with some of the other tuners we have. It's definitely better than like Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion, I would say, and a pretty decent card. Again, Halki Fibrax is the reason a lot of these tuners are on here, but I think this is definitely a pretty mid-level card in terms of the tier list. Last Will, this card is nuts, actually, especially like by modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards. I'm gonna put this in A tier. The fact that you could special summon any monster from your deck with 1500 or less attack, and all you have to do is have a monster hit the graveyard, you can link it off, you can sync it off, and guess what? Last Will is gonna be here. This card is crazy. This is a solid A tier card. Next up is Dark Matter Dragon. Man, this card is really, really good. I think I'm gonna put this in B tier. Now, Dark Matter Dragon's interesting because I feel like while it isn't something like a Gumbalar, a Ranga Miniad, or a True King of all Calamities, this card sets up some absolutely absurd plays. This allows you to Foolish Burial 3 of your best cards and just set up for some huge OTKs. I believe there's FTKs that were facilitated by this as well. Dark Matter, well, again, it's dragons. Like, dragons get some of the best support in the game, and this was one of them, so I'm actually going to give this a B tier. Astrograph Sorcerer is good, but I'm not sure if it's kind of in the league of some of these cards in the B tier here. I think I'm actually going to give Astrograph a C tier, but the amount of advantage this card can generate is nothing to scoff at because Astrograph is nuts. Change of Heart's actually an interesting one. We've had Mind Control legal for a long time now, and a lot of people just use Mind Control anyway, so if Change of Heart were to be legal, it would just be like playing another copy of Mind Control, but we've seen how powerful Mind Control can be in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm going to give this a B tier because it's a very strong card and every single deck can play it, and I think if it were legal, every deck might play it just because it's that good, but it's not necessarily a card that's going to break a format, right? It's just a very strong standalone card, and I think B tier is where it sits. Cyberjar, oh my god, I almost want to do F for Cyberjar, but I think I'm going to give it a little bit of respect and put it in the D tier, kind of similar to Cyberjar. I understand why this card is banned. Obviously, by today's standards, flip effects aren't that good, and no one's going to be resolving Cyberjar in 2021 unless they're really looking to troll someone, but Cyberjar is pretty cool. I like the fact that they have this sort of comeback mechanic, and it just does something different than Cyberjar, and I like it. I've always liked Cyberjar, so it's not like F tier. I definitely think it's a little bit better than that. Fishborg Blaster is crazy. I think, though, it's going to go in C tier, kind of along the lines of some of these other cards. They're very strong, but again, Fishborg Blaster needs to be played in a very, very specific type of deck, and so there are a lot of cards like that. I think Fishborg is a C. Chicken Game is like a D tier. Like, this card is good because it allows you to draw cards. The OCG, I believe, has this card unlimited, and it doesn't really do a whole lot, but Chicken Game has had its issues. It does set up for deep draw decks trying to FTK and the like, but this is actually like a fairly decent card, right? I mean, it's better than all of these down here, and so Chicken Game could be played in numerous decks just to give you a little bit of extra draw power. It's a fun, interesting little dynamic it adds to the game, so I'll give it a D. Graceful Charity, S tier. This should not be a surprise. Like I said, almost every single draw spell is probably going to be up here, except I guess Mirage of Nightmare is a little bit more conditional, but Graceful Charity, draw 3, discard 2. It's almost better than Pot of Greed, although you only keep 1 card. Setting up your graveyard for 2 cards might be better in some instances, especially with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And how much the graveyard is actually a key component of the game. It's definitely an S tier. Grinder Golem, oh god, this card is a nightmare. I'm gonna put this in B tier, actually. So Grinder Golem can actually do a lot of absolutely degenerate combos by itself because of the fact it gives you all of the tokens. tokens, and the fact that there's link monsters that bounce the Grinder Golem back to your hand, and the fact that you could play this in realistically any deck and be able to get away with that, I think this card is so stupid. I think it's just slightly better than some of the cards down here, solely because any deck can really play Grinder Golem, get away with it for the free link climb. B tier for Grinder Golem. Kaiser Coliseum, I really don't like this card. This card is just weird. It doesn't really seem that good, but it's very oppressive in decks that just sit on like a single monster and don't do a whole lot. I'm gonna put it in C tier because like I don't think it's bad enough to put it in D tier, but I don't think it's good enough to put it in B tier. Level Eater is just stupid because it's a non-once per turn monster that can resurrect itself as long as you have levels to eat off of your field. And yeah, I think it's a C tier though, because even though it can resurrect itself over and over again, you do need to be playing it in the right deck. Lunalight Tiger is a relatively new addition to the ban list. I'll give this a C tier as well. Again, it's one of those cards you need to play in the archetype, and the fact that you could resurrect your monsters 3 times with a single copy because you keep bouncing it back to your hand is really good, but again, it's relegated to a specific deck. Metamorphosis, I'm actually going to give a B tier. I really like the design of Metamorphosis. The fact that your cards metamorphosize into fusion monsters actually gave a very unique aspect to the fusion deck, or now the extra deck as we call it. The card's just really neat. Obviously, it was ripe for abuse, which is why the card is banned, and by today's standards, I'm pretty sure people would find ways to abuse it, but I think it's a very, very strong generic card that a lot of decks could really take advantage of. Shockmaster, Jesus Christ, this card is terrible. I want to put this in B tier because we're in the tier with Gumbalar, Rongaminiad, True King of all Calamities, and Utopic Zexal. Part of me almost wants to put this in A tier because I feel like this card probably saw more play than all of them, and I think what's unique about this is that you get to like pick which types of cards to shut off for the turn. Yeah, ugh, this card's nasty, dude. I don't know. I almost want to put this in A tier because of its legacy. Obviously, Zexal can stop everything, but I feel like Shockmaster just saw way more play. Yeah, I'm actually going to put Shockmaster in A tier. I'm feeling that. Painful Choice is S tier. This might individually be one of the single most powerful cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! The fact that you get to send 5 cards from your deck to the graveyard with 0 cost, your opponent has to add 1 to your hand, and the fact that you're not really giving your opponent a choice and everything you're sending is either just going to generate you more advantage. Imagine if this card were legal today. Imagine what you could do with it. It would be disgusting. Even back in the day when this card was legal, people were still doing absolutely crazy things with it. So this is for sure, without a doubt, an S tier. Performapal Monkey Board. God, I hate this card's shit-eating grin. So this is a weird one. This is a 1-card pendulum scale, and that is what every pendulum deck could ever ask for, and it's also searchable through a myriad of different ways. I'm gonna put this in B tier because it's a very, very strong card for pendulum specifically, but it is only for that specific archetype. However, this card essentially mitigates one of the biggest downsides of playing a pendulum deck, which was needing to assemble the scales, and Monkey Board allowed you to do that with ease. So I think it's slightly better than some of these cards down here because it kind of just broke the mold on how pendulum decks really worked. Spell Book of Judgment. Oh lord, this card is ridiculous. This card would allow you to generate so much advantage. You could get 5, 6, 7 cards off of a Spell Book of Judgment, and that was okay for a time. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh, ladies and gentlemen. Man, I don't know where to put this. This card, again, it's a spellbook specific card, so like you had to be playing the deck, but it allowed you to get so many cards. That's why I want to put it in A tier, but I feel like the A tier cards are very generic, so I'm gonna put it in B tier solely because it's only played in a specific deck, but this is a very, very high B tier, I would say. Premature Burial is a B tier card, I feel. Now, the reason for this is because it's generic. Any deck can play it. It's a monster reborn. Yes, it's an equip, but being an equip is almost good because you can bounce it back to your hand and reuse it with a lot of effects, and there's a lot of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that can do that, and so the fact that you could reuse a monster reborn multiple times, possibly extending combos, I think this is better than a C for that reason, which is why we have it B for Burial, I guess. Galaxy Tomahawks, another one of those dumb token producing cards, but it produces so many tokens. I mean, the fact that you could summon this in like the extra monster zone and then summon 5 tokens and just be able to do whatever you want with that, I don't think that's okay. I think it's a C tier card though, because again, only specific decks could make it, and it was cool, but definitely not fun. Mass Driver is like an F tier card. This is only on here because of the Frog FTK. This is how they did all the damage to kill someone back in the day. The game was a lot slower. There weren't as many tools to deal with FTKs then as there are now. I don't think people are going to play Mass Driver if it were legal. Maybe there's ways to enable FTKs with it. There probably is, but this is just a dumb card, so it's an F tier. Smoke Smoke Grenade is also a dumb card, but at least it's like a good card because you get to look at your opponent's hand and rip a card out of it. So it's kind of like confiscation, but the only reason this is really on here is because Noble Knight decks could use it multiple times, rip multiple cards out of the opponent's hand, and hand loop them so that you didn't really start with a whole lot. The card's at least good, and so I feel like this is a card that's on here because it's stupid, it's old, it has like outdated text, and people found a way to abuse it, but at least it's decent, right? These are like the decent cards that are banned, and you know, they need to be on here for a reason at times. Self-Destruct Button is an F tier. This card is so fucking stupid. The only reason this is on here is because it can possibly make it so that you and your opponent draw, and draws are just something that Konami likes to typically avoid. They've errated Ring of Destruction so that way it doesn't force a draw, and that way people can still play it. That's the only reason this card exists. Even if this card were allowed, I don't think people, unless they're specifically trying to troll, would actually play this card. This card's stupid. F tier. Colossus is a C tier, and I'm not doing that just because it's C for Colossus. Colossus is a card that a lot of people feel can come back, similar in light to Electromight, but Colossus is just a very oppressive card. Your opponent can't add cards from deck to hand. It has built-in protection. Back in the day, you could summon multiple of these at once, so people argue, oh, if you just have one, it's okay. But even with that, having a full end board, plus not being able to search your deck to help deal with it, I don't think that's very fun. I'm not fond of that card design, but the card is pretty decent. In the context of the rest of these cards, though, I think it's a solid C. The Tyrant Neptune is very similar to Starving Venom, as a matter of fact, but I'm actually going to throw this into F tier. At least Starving Venom in the Pendulum deck had utility outside of facilitating the FTK. It was actually just a generally decent card and was very easy to make for the deck. It kind of just slid right in. Tyrant Neptune, you kind of have to build around. It has the same bullshit where it can copy an Independent Nightingale, become like 6,000 attack, and burn your opponent for like 5,000 damage. Oh, and it's immune to like all card effects. So if it wasn't for Nightingale specifically, the card's only as good as what it can copy. And yeah, just like a really dumb card. So F tier. Return from the Different Dimension is S tier. If we have Dimension Fusion as S tier, we have to have this card on here as well. This is just the trap equivalent, but what's even better is that you can pay half your life points instead of 2,000, which meant this card was always active. And in addition to that, I believe it was only you summoning the monsters instead of both players with Dimension Fusion. This card carried so many people in so many formats while it was legal. Again, being able to just vomit 7 monsters onto the field is just insane and should not be allowed. And so, yeah, definitely S tier. Heavy Storm is probably a B. I kind of want to give this an A tier because Heavy Storm just wins games left and right. We have Harpy's Feather Duster legal now, and you would think a card that destroys all the opponent's cards and not all cards would be better, but Storm's really good because you can generate your own advantage off of popping your own cards, and I think that's why Storm is still banned. I'm actually going to put this in as A tier because as soon as you see Heavy Storm hit the field, you most likely know that the game is over, and it's just a devastatingly powerful card that every single deck can play. Yeah, I think I'm going to give this an A. Oh, I've been waiting for this one. Magical Scientist. Now, I really want to put this high up here because Magical Scientist is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's first truly broken cards, and I want to give it an S, but I think that's being too generous. I'm going to go ahead and give it an A tier. So the reason for this is because Magical Scientist just by itself, if it goes unanswered, think about how much advantage this gets you. You could summon 7 fusion monsters from the extra deck off of this effect, which effectively gives you 8 link worth of material, or if you have possible fusion plays, there's fusion tuners now, so that you can go into synchro plays with this card. This card back in the day was busted. This card now is still busted, I believe, and so I'm gonna give this an A tier, actually. Magical Scientist is badass. Royal Oppression, I think, is maybe another A tier card. This is a card that is very strong because it's similar to Vanity's Emptiness, where it shuts down special summoning, but it's reciprocal, and so both players can do it. Typically, you're gonna activate this when you're in a winning position so that your opponent has realistically zero way of coming back, but if they do have a way to come back, this card can bite you, where Vanity's Emptiness, if your opponent starts clearing your board, Emptiness goes along with it, so you're not really locked under it. So I think Oppression is slightly under Emptiness for that reason, but still a very, very oppressive card. Man, the tier list is getting so big, I actually have to scroll down now. Tempest Magician, this is like, I want to give this like an F tier. The only reason this is on here is because it facilitates FTKs and has always facilitated spell counter focused FTKs. It needs to be banned, but it's just banned for that reason alone, and it's not really like a good card, it's just an FTK enabler, so F tier. Sixth Sense, S tier, no question about it. Sixth Sense is one of the craziest cards ever printed. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking with this one, because being able to draw 5 or 6 cards, or you just mill 4 at the most, and usually that's fine either way. I don't know what they were thinking with this card. This card was legal for like a couple months, and that was a mistake. This card should have never been made. What do we got next down here? Mind Master. Okay, interesting. So Mind Master, it's not as good as Substitute because you have to pay life points, and if you don't have the correct pieces, then this FTK doesn't really work, even though the FTKs were very similar to that of Substitute. I think that really hurts it though, because if any of those combo pieces get hit, it really affects how the FTK can go. I don't know. I kind of want to put this in B tier just because it's slightly under Substitute, but it really does need quite the combo pieces and the deck built around it to work. So I almost want to put this in C tier actually, and I'm not too sure about that one. Now, Snatch Steel is an interesting one because Snatch Steel is arguably better than Change of Heart because you keep the monster, and yes, your opponent does gain the life points, but the thing is, sometimes your opponent doesn't have a way to out the Snatch Steel, and now they're staring down their own monster. And I put Change of Heart in B tier, but I almost want to put Snatch Steel into A tier because we actually had this card unbanned for a format, and Konami realized that that was a very bad idea because they quickly rebanned it after the fact once people remembered how good this card is. Being an equip spell, it also was searchable in more ways, I believe, than Change of Heart was. So I'm going to give this an A tier. I actually think, even though you can't take face downs with Snatch Steel, I think Snatch Steel is sometimes better than Change of Heart. All right, let's see what else we got here. Wow, we're actually getting pretty close to the end. I didn't think we were already there. So Jin is a very oppressive card, but again, you do need to be playing a ritual-focused deck, but this card was one of the reasons why the Necros format was what it was. I think I'm going to give this a C tier. Again, it needs to be played in a specific deck, but this is like on Vanity's emptiness level of broken and made it so that a lot of decks couldn't even play in the format. Fun and interactive. Joker is like a D tier card. This card could probably come off the list and it wouldn't really do a whole lot. I know why this is on here, obviously because of Monkey Board and all the shenanigans with that, but at the same time, I think Joker coming back to 1 wouldn't really hurt a whole lot. The card's good. I mean, it's a Stratos for the specific archetypes, and so you really can't go wrong with that, but yeah, D tier. Plushfire's another one. Like, this is a card I question that if they even like play tested with this card because of how absolutely absurd this is, because you can trigger this card multiple times. I'm going to put this in C tier just solely because of the fact that it is so broken in multiples, and was part of the reason for one of the very few tier 0 decks we've experienced in Yu-Gi-Oh! Forceful Sentry is the next in line of the hand destruction cards. I'm going to give this a B tier. This is, to me, very similar to Confiscation. I actually think Forceful Sentry is slightly better because it's 1,000 life points less that you have to pay because it's free, and it shuffles the card back into the deck, which may not seem very good, but a lot of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually want to be in the graveyard. So if you shuffle it away and it's something that isn't searchable, you can usually rest assured that you're not going to see it unless your opponent just has a lot of ways to draw cards. And so there's a debate as to between Confiscation and Forceful Sentry, which one is better, but I feel like they're about the same level, so I'll say B tier. Danglong, I feel like I have to put in the same tier as Ib just because they're both the level 5 synchros that are on the ban list, both very, very powerful enablers for their respective strategies, but I feel like that's where they sit. Soul Charge is S tier, no doubt about it. A card that allows you to summon 5 monsters from your graveyard should not be allowed in Yu-Gi-Oh! This card can be played in any deck. The fact that you don't get a battle phase is irrelevant when you're most likely going to win off of what you summon. This card is absolutely bonkers. Should never have been printed. The card is so stupid. I'm so happy this card is gone. Oh my god. You can see we have a trend going of some of the cards that allow you to summon 5 monsters in 1 turn are all in the S tier. Weird. Magispector Unicorn Kieran. This card is so not fun to play against. It's just generically good pendulum support. I think I'm just gonna throw this in C. It's like okay, but it's not great. Destrudo I feel like is probably also a C tier. It's similar in line to some of these other tuner monsters that are up here. It's a very cool enabler for all the level 7 synchros and can enable some really good plays, but compared to some of these other cards, I don't think Destrudo is really higher than that. Azathoth is a B tier. This card, I don't know what they were thinking when this came out. The fact that Azathoth makes it so that your opponent can't use any sort of effects, that effect doesn't even activate. It's just like a condition, so you can't even like respond to it or attempt to negate it. And when you get into that little nuance of Yu-Gi-Oh! That it just makes it not fun at all. So you already have an unfun card that has like loopholes to make it more unfun. Yeah, B tier card, but absolutely F tier fun to play against. Harpor is an F tier. This goes up like with Mirage Stalio. Both of these cards could come back and would do absolutely nothing for the game. Orcus was just the best deck for so long that Konami decided to do something about it, and this card could come back and would do absolutely nothing. Nightmare Mermaid, this is a pretty decent card. I don't know if it's like Nightmare Goblin good, because it doesn't necessarily bestow you with like a normal summon, but it does allow you to convert it into another monster and start going off with all the nightmare plays and then kind of lock your opponent a little bit. I don't think it's like, it is a little bit degenerate, but I think Mermaid's sitting in C tier. Ultimate Offering's like a D tier. This is one of those cards that's like decent for what it does, but who's going to be playing Ultimate Offering in 2021, I guess is the question. The fact that you could have like 15 extra normal summons is kind of broken, but I can't really fathom seeing people playing Ultimate Offering during this time. There are ways to search it. We have more ways to play the card now than ever before, so maybe I'm wrong, but I think just for what the card does and the fact that it's a trap on top of it, yeah, I think it's a D. Next up is Union Carrier. I'm actually going to give this a B. This card is deceptively powerful. This was a generic card that you could play in the extra deck, and it really just helped facilitate a lot of different plays for a lot of different decks, and maybe it was a little bit too good because ultimately it did get banned. I like to have the more generically good cards in this B tier because more decks are able to take advantage of them for that reason, and the fact that Union Carrier saw as much play as it did and helped enable some of the most degenerate stuff we've seen in the past few years of Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not really surprised to see that this was the latest card banned on the Forbidden and Limited list, so pretty definitive B tier from me for Union Carrier. And that brings us to the final card, Victory Dragon. This is an F tier card. This card is so bad. No one is ever going to resolve Victory Dragon because guess what? If you see Victory Dragon hit the field, you just scoop up your cards and your opponent can never resolve the win condition. I don't know why this is banned. Like, no one would ever play this card, even though it is cool because you can technically win the match on turn 1, but that's never going to happen. No one would ever let that happen ever. And so, yeah, the card's just terrible. So F tier. But that's going to wrap it up. We did all 101 cards on the ban list. So this is the tier list for your eyes, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually interesting. We have a nice little bell curve going on here. I didn't prep this ahead of time. I actually just did this off the cuff, and I'm actually surprised it curved out the way that it did. It's very fascinating to see the majority of the cards in C tier. We slowly curve out and get to the top of S tier, and then it slowly curves out down here for D and F tier too. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. And, you know, obviously these are just all my opinions. You guys may have your own. So I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think down in the comments. So be sure to let me know. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a lot of fun to do. This was a huge nostalgia trip. Would you guys know I've just been on this like year-long nostalgia trip at this point. If you guys enjoyed watching the video, be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you enjoyed the video a lot, be sure to support me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to the history of Yu-Gi-Oh, where we go in depth and play with a lot of these banned cards and actually play them in their respective formats so you guys can learn why these cards were banned in the first place. Thank you all so much for watching the video. I know it was a long one, so thank you for sticking till the end, and we will see you next time.